Welcome back to the Educated Podcast, the show that unlocks the real stories and innovations behind the Doctor of Education experience. Each episode welcomes trailblazing educators, industry innovators, and visionary policy leaders who share how their doctorates transformed their lives and their careers. The goal here is simple: for you to laugh, to learn, to get inspired as guests reveal their diverse paths, pivots, and possibilities of the EdD journey. I'm your host, Dr. Minerva, and it's not every day that you get to talk with someone who's a culture of health leader. Shout out to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the National Collaborative for Health Equity. Dr. Treasure Sheppard is a visionary leader whose work is helping shape stronger, healthier, and more resilient communities. As a strategic initiatives project manager with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, she helps orchestrate the Watts Rising Collective impact model. And get this, shepherds a variety of infrastructure and capital projects from concept to completion, with a focus on sustainability, public health, mobility, infrastructure, and affordable housing. Treasure is a true architect of community change. From spearheading major grants to leading social impact initiatives, her research and reach is incredible. She is also the president and CEO of the Pasadena Recreation and Park Foundation, and she is a Northeastern trained Doctor of Education. She is a living masterclass in how to turn an EdD into real-world results. Treasure, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm very excited.
Fantastic. I'm delighted that you're here, truly. So you're a living example of what an EdD can do for a community. I want to start with your why. What was the spark that set your academic path in motion?
Yes, I knew I wanted to be an engineer since I was age 7. I took a career test. My mom allowed me to go to a career center at a local community college. And from there, based on the subjects that I liked, it was either lawyer or aerospace engineer. And so from then on, I went into focus mode and decided aerospace engineering was what I wanted to do. I went to college, and around my junior year, I was just over the isms that I was experiencing: racism, sexism, ageism, everything in between, and decided I don't want to do this for the next 50 years of my career. I want to address the issue that I'm facing head on. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and study education policy. I'll develop curricula to help kids learn not to be prejudiced and to love all and treat people with respect. And in doing so, realize that kids don't have the attention span to grasp anything like that when they're hungry or when they're sick. And then decided, okay, let me address that. And went into health policy. And same thing, realized that it doesn't really matter how much free food we give kids. It doesn't matter how much medication we give kids for free or at an affordable rate if they don't have any safe place to store it, a stable place to store it. And so that's when I got into housing policy. And throughout this entire journey, it's probably maybe like 10 years of work. So I'm getting my bachelor's and my master's throughout that time. I had chosen organizational leadership as the topic because I felt like that was a subject or a topic that would allow me to go into multiple fields and kind of travel well with me as my interests took me on these unique journeys. And then, yeah, finally I decided an EdD was necessary because in order to be in the rooms that change the world and make greater impact, I felt like in order to gain that respect and not have to deal with what I was dealing with as an engineering student, I needed to have an authority that no one could question. And I thought the doctorate degree was great for that. And the EdD came right on time. So I'm glad I got it.
Wow, that context changes everything. From what I'm hearing, the isms that you experience as an aerospace student, are you saying that you didn't experience those from an organizational leader standpoint?
No, this was from students, this was from faculty. The personnel actually at my college were the ones that were really supportive and understood what I was going through. So I can't blame the actual structure of the college I was at. It was individuals, but the culture, and that's something you learn in organizational leadership, the organizational culture is what allows that to happen, right? Engineering is considered a man's world, Asian and white men world, right? Especially in America. And that's not saying that others can't thrive there. Many have and will. But that is typically who is selected in those spaces or who is rising in those spaces. And so, unfortunately, and this is something people can learn. Organizational leadership is not just about a formal structure. It can be informal. It could be the neighborhood crew that is an organization. It's just three or more individuals going towards a similar goal. That could be me and you right now, and one more person deciding to listen to this podcast. We are all looking at how EDDs better the world. So all of that can be organization. So it doesn't have to be just that one. So for me, the system of engineering and higher education in that space wasn't the most welcoming. No one's fault in particular. It just wasn't going to work for me because I could not subscribe to that on a daily basis.
I'm glad you know yourself,
Yes.
right? So it's one thing to see the credentials on paper, but hearing the heart behind the hustle really sets the stage for everything else. And so, with that, I love to hear about how you bridge the gap between the spark that you mentioned and the career that you've built.
Recognizing how my initial concern was like prejudice and how people experience life and maybe recognizing similarities and otherness, but respecting both throughout their journeys, I realized it's had this domino effect. You can't really talk about that and expect people to take that information to heart if their immediate needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is not being addressed. Recognizing how intertwined, I'd say, everything altered my journey and allowed me to take those steps from engineering to education to health to housing. And once I got into housing, I said, oh, okay, well, again, housing for me was like the basis, but that's not the final thing. You can do the domino effect all the way through, especially in America. Our systems are intertwined in a way that maybe others are not. Recognizing that my skill set, my heart, my empathy, my experiences through having firsthand experience with isms, and then my knowledge, my ability to apply organizational leadership concepts to some of these issues was unique. And so I wanted to study that at the doctoral level and allow my dissertation to kind of take me there. Another kind of spark simultaneously, like in high school, I watched the response to Hurricane Katrina from our government and was really frustrated with how that was handled. I felt although faith-based institutions were used, it was the larger organizations, like not these individual storefront churches that so many of Black and brown individuals go to. It was these larger organizations. So I felt like if we had connected with who's in the community and allowed them to be the bridge, then some of the responses to that would have been better. Recognizing that throughout natural disasters from 2006 all the way till now, kind of wanted to focus my dissertation on that too. So collaboration began to be the glue that stuck all of my things together. We were also siloed. Education was siloed from health, was siloed from housing. And so me being able to kind of connect those dots in my head, I wanted to put it on paper in a way that allowed people to reference it.
Wow.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm curious then, how did those early values start pulling you towards this specific type of community work?
I think I could see myself in everyone. When you're able to see yourself in everyone, the good, the bad, the ugly, then you have heart, you can give grace in a way that maybe you wouldn't before. But then also you fight. You fight to the death of it to make sure that they get what they need. They are humans just like you. And then it kind of removes the they, them versus me, right? We're all fighting for this together. If I help this group, I'm still helping the larger people or humanity as well as myself. So it's just moving the needle as much as I can.
It's a little fish in a big pond. Looking back at that version of you and then going back to your degree, were the specific challenges you were seeing around or on the ground that made you realize that the EDD was the right move?
Yeah, that's a great question. I knew I wanted to get a doctorate degree. At that point, I hadn't decided if a PhD was best or an EDD was best. So I started doing my research. I was already working full time in the government space, so public agency for housing and development. And I didn't really want to leave. I wanted to make sure that I was able to keep my feet on the ground. I felt like I was making an impact directly. I was working at the micro level at that point. I wanted to still be able to make some change in the next few years that I knew a doctorate would help me do, but I needed to still be in touch. I didn't want to take the time away. That kind of removed the PhD program for me because I needed to do a program that was hybrid or non-traditional. So I didn't have to give up my 9 to 5 hours. That's how I landed upon the Northeastern EDD program. What really got me is they described it as a scholar practitioner program. And I really love that model, being able to excel academically and be able to communicate and translate my thoughts into these theories and then put them into practice was pivotal for me. I really wanted that to happen, but also to remain a practitioner and to continue to gain that experience so that my resume didn't have this gap there and I could immediately go into these leadership positions because I had the real world experience to back it up. I thought that was a combination that couldn't be beat. So EDD it was.
EDD it was. That makes a lot of sense, especially for someone working at the intersection of systems, people, and community impact. So, if
Mhm.
you had to describe what the EDD has meant to you now, how would you explain its value?
Hmm. Well, one, it is valuable, so there's no question there. I think it has been unique for me because, like I said, I was trying to gain some sort of authority, me knowing what I already experienced in the academic world as an engineering student, wanting to not avoid, because you can't change people's mindsets, but wanting to stop the buck when it came to people questioning what I knew or what I had. If I was at the top of the top and I had the terminal degree in that field, and what really could you say? Then you'd have to admit that you were biased or judging based on things that really had no weight in this room. So for me, I think that still stands. I don't really highlight that I have the doctorate unless I feel the need to. And that's typically the only time when is when someone is challenging something that we all know to be a basic fact in that particular field. It's not something I've had to also do a lot either because my experience tends to speak at the same value as my educational background. But yeah, I think it's needed. It allows you to get into rooms, especially when you're trying to make change, systemic change, that maybe, again, others might hesitate to invite you into. We're still in this space, especially in community development, where lived experience is beginning to be valued as much as professional or academic. So me being able to have all three, I think is like oh yeah, we got to talk to that person. So I think it's valuable. It's worth it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned how lived experience is helping to be a part of the conversation now,
Mhm.
as grants are being written, as research is unfolding. And so I'm glad that you highlighted that.
Yes,
And
very important.
I love to move into the research side of your journey because that's where the story really sort of deepens. And at what point did you realize your dissertation could serve as a blueprint for action and not just an academic requirement?
Oh, I will say that was also one of the reasons why I chose Northeastern in particular. Your degree had to be actionable and you had to be, or your dissertation, I'm sorry, had to be actionable and your methodology had to be action research of some kind. That was a requirement. They really have a very strong systemic and social justice core. And so if it's not addressing something that's really changing the world for the better, it probably wouldn't have been accepted in the first place. But you're usually describing that in your admissions essay, like what it is that you want to change. And so for me, I reflected on the Hurricane Katrina part and I told them the journey I just told you all and how I wanted to make sure that whatever community I was in was able to experience collaboration for the better and connecting some of those dots. And so for me, I knew I was going to be focusing on faith-based institutions and trying to make sure that health equity was a result of that. Now, again, Any student, once you start your EdD or PhD, you'll, especially if you're doing action research, you'll know that it will change if you're involving others in as much research as you have to do for your lit review and understanding of methodologies. You will alter your initial idea to more so align with theories that have already been proven. And so I had to do that. And therefore, based institutions was not the final focus. It ended up being community-based organizations because that was a more broader term that more communities had. I did not want to like only focus on Christian or Muslim or Judaism like households. I wanted to make sure that there was space for everybody in my research. And so I brought in that.
I'm like, it sounds very diverse and inclusive. Your work is deeply tied to collaboration, what that looks like on the ground. Specifically, you use a community-based participatory action research model
Mhm.
for your dissertation, which can
Yes.
be an intense yet rewarding type of approach. Looking back at your findings, what was the biggest surprise that forced you to unlearn what you thought you knew about collaboration?
Mhm.
And how does that change how you lead today?
Anytime someone asks me that question, it can change because I learned a lot through that process, which actually made me fall in love with research. But one, it took much longer than expected. And so that just wasn't something I thought would happen. I thought because this was a town that I was very familiar with, I knew a lot of the individuals that I would be working with. I thought I understood them. And I think that's the first thing any researcher has to do is remove themselves from maybe the outcome. I thought I wanted to focus on intersectoral collaboration in particular and making sure that I was connecting three entities and creating an MOU. And I thought that would be it. We'd be done in a month. I was just going to bring them to the table, explain why they needed each other, and move it along. And I thought I'd be graduating later that year. That was not the case. But I'm grateful that it wasn't because that was so easy. That was very much a business deal, not necessarily leadership at its fullest in dealing with the consequences of maybe historical context or things that were coming up emotionally for individuals. My organization that I was working with on site, they were a nonprofit and they needed additional help kind of moving through a post-COVID grant. And again, not something that I knew when I initially came to them about doing the research with them. They hadn't gotten an award yet. So by the time I was ready to move forward with the research, they were like, hey, we actually need your skill set here because you already do this kind of stuff for your 9 to 5, right? I'm like, okay, bet I'll help. And that was a journey in recognizing 4 years later, after the pandemic hit, people were still in need, but also that there was still that silos that I had recognized even as a teenager from Hurricane Katrina. They were not connecting with the government and not connecting with the people. This was the entity that most of those people trusted, but they didn't have the funding that they needed. So finally, they have a little bit of funding. How can they use it best? So that was awesome. I'd say being able to build capacity for leaders in the community and not leaders with formal titles, but just people who were trusted by other people. Building that capacity was a learning experience, something I will always take into the next research space. I think that's probably the longest lasting gift you can give to a community is to help them empower themselves, like embolden them to move forward with any other change that they see necessary and support them through that. And that's like relationship building. So yeah, learned how to build better relationships, learned how to be quiet and kind of put my bias to the side or my desires to the side. And that came from rereading my positionality statement, being honest in the initial one that I wrote, right? So recognizing, okay, this is a little bit of me coming out. This is not what they're saying as I read through this data. And then that lived experience again, letting them tell me what they need and letting me guide them maybe through what options they have, letting them still choose, because that's what I'm more so there for. They don't know the structure, they don't know the systems the way I do, but I don't know the problem the way they do. I'm not experiencing it every day, right? So being able to humble myself through that was really helpful. And lastly, I'm sorry, this is a very lengthy answer, but it's a tool that I want everyone to know. It's called Joe Harry's Window. And it's really helpful. That is something I take with me everywhere I go now. And I teach my coworkers, my colleagues, in any research capacity about this. But Joe Harry's Window is by two men, Joseph and Harry. I don't remember their last names, but Johari. Look it up. But they have a window pane and there's four squares in it. And the first one is what we both know. So what I, Treasure the researcher, knows, and what my co-researcher in action research, that's what you would call it, the participants, but what they know. So what we both know is today is a Monday and it's sunny outside and we're all in Southern California right now. And then there's what Treasure knows, but what they don't know. And that would be like organizational leadership, understanding urban planning, parks and rec, all of that. And then there's what they know that I don't know. And that's all about the problems that's happening in that community, the solutions that have already been tried, the historical context that maybe I wasn't here for, right? And then there's what we both don't know. And that's two things, like what we don't know that we don't know. So there's questions we can't even ask because we don't even know to ask them yet. And then there's we don't know what the state of the world is going to be, or the state of the union will be in 2 years, because we don't know who our president will be and what that will do for policy. So preparing for the unknown, also leaving space for what we don't know right now, but we will learn, and being able to be adaptable. So I think Joe Harry's window is a tool that is so underused, but it definitely helped me. So I learned all of that via the EdD process.
That's great. And you're able
Yes.
to teach us about it too. So it's wonderful. So your research clearly connects directly to the work that you do in the field. Let's talk about that bridge. How do the lessons from your EdD show up at Watts Rising and the Housing Authority every day?
Yeah. Watts is a beautiful community that I work with at all levels. So I'm working at the micro level, like one-on-one with individuals, at this meso level where I might be working with organizations, CEOs or VPs of development, addressing policy or regulations for a particular location. And then I'm working with entities like HUD and USDA around larger concerns and grants. And so that's the macro level. And so being able to transition through all of those and still keep the goal the same or similar, I think I would say the EdD and organizational leadership specifically helped me with that. That is a skill set that I would assign to leadership or to business, to be able to understand an issue and be able to explain it at all levels. Everyone who's in Watts may not have a doctorate degree, right? That's part of the disparities that are hitting Watts' education. There are a lot of well-educated individuals that live in Watts, but not nearly as many as there should be with the skill set that they have. So being able to explain to them in their own terms in a way that they understand and can take hold of the issue on their own is unique. So I'd say that's that. There's also emotional IQ that you have to have in dealing with people who have been traumatized so many different ways, so often, and so recently by the institution that I work for, not HACLA in particular, the Housing Authority, but the government. And when you go into certain spaces, whatever government agency you work for doesn't really matter. You work for the man. And so recognizing that, but not taking it to heart. It's hard, but it's necessary. And so that's something I have to do all the time. And that's not just Watts, that's LA, all over. I've gone to Selma, Alabama, that have been met with the same response. It's just the experience of marginalized communities with this entity. And so understanding that is important. Outside of that, it's a regular job, research opportunity. It's just, again, putting into your mind that you don't know everything. And that Joe Harry's window is really helpful when it comes to moving into spaces that have a historical relationship with trauma from that entity. Mhm.
That's an excellent point that you make to not only talk about past trauma, but
Mhm.
also things that are happening currently.
Yeah, you'd
So
be surprised.
I can imagine. Yeah. So you oversee a range of infrastructure and capital projects from concept to completion, which is
Mhm.
amazing. What does that kind of leadership require when you're trying to serve both systems and communities as well? You mentioned Joe Harry's window, and I'm just
Mhm.
wondering if you can give a few more examples.
Well, honesty for sure, and transparency. I think if you're trying to even attempt to rebuild someone's understanding of the man or the government system and also gain their respect as an individual, then I think you have to respect them first and you have to be transparent with them first. So not deciding that they wouldn't understand this, so we're not even going to talk about it, right? Don't make that decision for them. Give them the autonomy. Be ethical in how you approach a lot of those conversations that maybe some researchers in the past never thought they should, and that's why they feel surprised or that's why they feel distrusting of even academic research institutions. That's also considered the man at this point because they've come into these places and have played. That's what it feels like on the other side, right? You said you were going to help us, but we never saw the end result. You had millions of dollars, you said, you showed us the paperwork, but we never saw a change in our community. 10 years later, we're still trying to fix the same issue we were trying to fix before. So recognizing that that's how they've been treated and doing everything you can to do this differently, give them a unique new experience. Okay, well, every researcher is not like the one I met when I was 5. There are some people like Treasure who comes in and answers my question, even if I ask it 20 times. She's going to answer it the same way, right? Even if I'm yelling at her as I ask it, she's going to take the time to get me the data points that I'm asking for so I understand. And even if I don't know that I don't understand, she's going to push and push and push to help me be able to converse in a way that allows me to be heard and not just ignored. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing I'd say beyond like transparency and Johari's window is innovative thinking. And that's around systems, but also around solutions. There doesn't have to be like the same goal that we had 20 years ago. We might have thought the answer to homelessness was more affordable units, but affordable to who? Who's deciding what that number is, right? Because 30% of some of these rates, market rate rents, is way too much still because some people, like I'll say the minimum wage is not keeping up with the cost of living. So affordable to who, one. And then two, it might not be that there's a need for more units. That's not the case in LA. We do need more units, but there might be a need for more jobs as we build these units, right? And then maybe they don't qualify for some of these jobs, but Watts Rising has a workforce development side too, where they're training or have trained individuals to help with construction of these units. So like now they have a whole new career. Construction is well paying, right? So being able to invest in communities, not just in this physical sense, but in this academic sense, in this like emotional sense for sure is helpful as well. So you're not leaving them worse or the same than when you came, you're leaving them better off. Now they have a career, now they have education and tools behind their name the same way I got my EdD. Now they have some letters behind theirs and they can do some things with that don't just limit them to the confines of their 2 square mile radius location. Now they can move around a bit differently. And that's something they didn't have before you came. So being able to boost their understanding around something, but also their privilege in these immediate ways, but also in these long lasting ways, I think is really important if you're trying to change the understanding and relationship that they've had with the entity.
That must be really empowering. Someone from the community gets a construction background and actually does construction in their neighborhood. To see something that they've built through their labor must be really inspiring for those who get to experience that.
Yeah, and there's a sense of ownership and pride around the project. So I know some developers have an issue with their property being defaced or the property being destroyed by the community because the community is concerned about gentrification. So they're trying to limit anybody coming into that space. So they don't want it to be beautiful if it doesn't mean that they get to use it, right? And so if you're having these people build it, then it's like, I don't touch the work my dad worked on. Right. And then also, if you're making sure that they have some sort of long value in it, like that might be where my auntie lives. We just got to wait to see, which unit gets selected on the lottery, but like our people will be living there. That's much different than just one developer buying a block of land in the middle of a neighborhood and building it into condos that none of these people will be able to afford. So, like, really considering how you can, like you said, involve them so that they are empowered and feel like they're part of it.
And that's a great reminder that leadership is often about holding space, juggling a lot of moving pieces. So let's just go back to the health aspect of this.
Mhm.
You are a culture of health leader. I want to talk about health equity in a community like Watts. How would you describe that to us?
I don't think health equity is existing there right now at the way that it could, I should say. Watts Rising has been there for about 10 years, more or less. We have been doing a good job. We've been redeveloping one of the public housing sites for about 10 years. And that has been our goal, like not to just throw new housing at individuals and then expect their mindset and their health status to change. That's not how it works, but kind of very similar to like how I got here. So recognizing like quality of life in all realms is really how you make that change, right? So that's the workforce development, that's the education piece, that's the decision-making piece. They get to decide what we work on first so that their needs are addressed first. But also, health equity is reducing these disparities, helping them see the true costs. And sometimes, and I would say for culture of health, there's this framework that we utilize by Dr. Gail Christopher. It's the TRHT framework, truth, racial healing, and transformation. And so that truth is about acknowledging racism and its role in some of these disparities, if not all, right? The role it has played in moving the systemic oppression throughout certain communities at the rate that it does and causing the disparities that health equity is trying to reduce or totally eradicate. That truth is so key. You cannot transform anything or have the racial healing until you acknowledge that there's racism and it has some power in this world against these communities. So I think that is key. And it's been something that has helped even in Watts community as well as my own. And we're in California, right? So I can only imagine what that would look like in a space like Mississippi or Alabama, who has an even deeper history with racism than the rest of the country. All of that is helpful. Culture of health is a goal. So if you look at Robert Wood Johnson, they've defined culture of health. I don't have the exact words, but it's something like the ideal state where everyone has a choice around what their health outcomes will be, right? So if I smoke a cigarette, that's me choosing whatever that consequence is, versus if I live in Cancer Alley, I'm just born into inhaling and ingesting certain chemicals that are not supposed to be there for me. Like I didn't get to choose my life ending at a certain time. Same thing with Watts, same thing with Los Angeles, everywhere. Don't let your zip code define your health. And so that's what Watts Rising is trying to do. At least that's what my goal is, even outside of Watts Rising. Being able to identify how is this particular zip code or group of people being impacted by their geography, by their location. How is their health less than that of those that live in Beverly Hills, and that's 15 miles away? Make it make sense, right? And that takes time, and I won't be able to catch everyone or quote unquote provide equity to everyone for a while, but that's the goal. And the first part of that is education. So then that gives them the choice to move if they're able to. But they can only do that again if they have the money or the means. So making sure that we have some of those resources lined up too.
Education is key to the future, and to
Mhm.
be able to have a choice is numero uno to one's quality of life. And so, what are the biggest barriers you see when different agencies or organizations say that they want to collaborate, but they struggle to work together effectively?
Oh, trust for sure. Relationship building. Some entities have worked together before and it just didn't work well. And that could have been like based on individuals, not the actual organization's missions or goals not being aligned, but just maybe egos competing with the other. Sometimes the understanding or the distrust being like, well, we weren't able to work with you well last time, so we don't want to try that again. We could use this money better elsewhere. And that could be true, but it's likely not. It's just having an understanding. And sometimes that lack of trust comes because there was no clarity around the roles that were supposed to be played in the first place. And that's where my initial research was going to be around like building these MOUs, identifying the strengths of all the organizations and entities involved, and making the roles so clear that no one could mess it up or there'd be accountability for whoever did. When you don't have a clear role or mission, and then you also don't have accountability, that's where the distrust lingers because now it's like, well, they didn't even say sorry, or they didn't even pay that part when they got the money back, or whatever the issue might be. That's the key thing that causes an issue. Also, communication, which goes back to the clarity of roles. Then just the silos. Sometimes a bunch of architects want to sit in a room with a bunch of architects and talk about how great their idea is, but they don't want to sit with someone who might tell them it's not great, right? Or to change that piece of property into this. And so humility is necessary when you're trying to reach a certain goal. But that's where key vision is important, and that's the communication piece again. So if we're not all trying to get to this goal, then maybe we all don't need to be in this room. Or if your goal benefits from my goal, then maybe we do need to be in this room, and maybe you can change what parts you decide to throw your input in, right? It doesn't have to be exactly how you want it, as long as it gets to this goal that then helps everyone else. So figuring out how to work together, but also what role you need to play.
Yeah, you mentioned humility, and
Mhm.
we also were talking about health equity. Could you define or distinguish cultural competency from cultural humility in a context of health equity?
Cultural competency is important. It's like the baby steps. I say everyone should come into a research space with that. You need to understand the cultures that you're dealing with, the similarities, the differences, and you need to come at them with respect. So that's what cultural competency to me is, being able to be in a room with people who think differently than you, who are different than you, who may look different than you, right? But understanding that, again, we're here for a purpose and not letting whatever biases you might have or been taught cause friction or conflict with that particular goal. Cultural humility is this space of really understanding, like I was describing with the Joe Harry's window. I don't know everything about this. I might have read a book on Latinx individuals from Los Angeles. I might have gotten that detailed, right? But that doesn't mean that I get to overtalk them when they're telling me something or they're telling me I'm wrong or I don't fully understand something. I need to shut up and listen to the lived experience of that individual because that's their life every day. I'm just a fly on the wall. I get to see it sometimes, right? But if I'm the fly on the wall, then my knowledge, my brain is not that big around the subject. That is not what my expertise is on. And being okay with that. That's also something any person who's pursuing a doctorate degree, whether it's an EdD or a PhD, you will not know everything about that topic. You will know your niche. You will know the thing that you focused your dissertation on. That's the thing that you are really, really well versed in. But that doesn't mean you won't have to ask questions or read a book. You also know how to go through and what to look for in your subject, how to get to the answer probably much more quickly than anyone else. But that doesn't mean you know everything. And the ability to always be a student and learn, even from those who might not have the formal titles that are higher than yours, is really where humility, especially cultural humility, comes in. It's necessary in this kind of work.
Okay. Hearing you describe cultural humility and distinguishing it from
Mhm.
cultural competency, I'm wondering what gives you hope that communities can still build resilience even when resources are limited?
Oh, they already are. That's evident in the communities that I've been to, that I'm part of, that I work with. When you listen and you are humble enough to come in and ask some questions, like even the question of, hey, I noticed this thing. Don't even come to them with, hey, I noticed this thing, right? Just how do you like your community? What are the things you love about it? What are the things you don't like? That kind of question before even bringing a problem to them will tell you some things. They'll be like, oh, we love this, or that's just who we are, and not trying to necessarily change their mind. Like, you're sure you're okay with that thing? Like, no, they're fine, right? And then they begin to tell you, oh, but what we really don't like is this and this. And that would be the last thing from some researchers' minds. Even I've been surprised at the things that people have asked for. One is that when you're coming into that space, asking them, they'll show you what they need. But also, they show you how they maybe worked through something and how they like that system better. So I know, for example, internationally, we've been shown in America images from Africa. They'll play the sad music behind it and told, oh, they're in such despair, right? But honestly, if you talk to some of the individuals in these villages, they'll be like, no, what we don't want is what y'all got. Capitalism is stressful, it seems. We just want to eat together. We're not fighting over who gets this part of the chicken. We're good. And genuinely, they're good. That is not their concern. Yes, they'd like medication. Yes, they'd like maybe infrastructure, but not at the cost that we are willing to pay over here. Right? And so understanding that, yes, in America, what we have might be great or not, which is something we're learning, right? But we also have something to learn from some of these other cultures. So they can teach us a few things that we can then begin to be innovative around. So like, oh, how can I bring that and that into this new design and then make it that's so much more acceptable for that community to take in and embrace.
Yeah, that's a powerful example about how cultures differ,
Mhm.
values differ based on cultures. I would say common sense is not common, it's cultural. I'm glad
Yes.
you made that point. And so, speaking about civic leadership, how has earning an EDD shaped your confidence and credibility in roles as a commissioner, board member, and foundation leader?
It has given me the opportunities to be brought up in those rooms before they selected me. For sure, given me the confidence to lead in a way that maybe I wouldn't have felt as confident to do as a young Black woman. All of these spaces that you mentioned are predominantly white and older individuals that are my colleagues. So being able to lead them does take confidence, but also remembering like all the skills that I just mentioned throughout this interview could be applied with old white men. It's not just like this is how you talk to marginalized communities. This is how you talk to anybody. This is how you work with anybody. I keep the same leadership style that I would use in Watts, I use in Beverly Hills. And I speak to them, I make sure that I'm understanding what the goal is for real. And if I disagree with the goal, now that's something I do differently in maybe these spaces is, hey, are we forgetting something? Is there a different goal that we might want to alter? Do we want to shift a little bit in this way so that we are being more inclusive, so that we are considering these other individuals? I always had this piece of confidence, but I'm always going to state what seems ridiculous to me. That was why I left the engineering space. It wasn't because I couldn't hang. It was because I knew I'd be arguing every day in that system. And that wasn't the goal I wanted to take on. I really just wanted to change it overall. So yes, if I need to, then hey, I'm not down with that. That's not the move we're gonna make. And you can either stay and get cool with it or you can leave. Or I can leave. I don't even have to stay here. What did you guys want me here for if it's not for me to challenge some of the basic prejudices that you guys have? So being okay with conflict if it means sustainable equity overall.
I'm cracking up inside when you said you'll be arguing all day. Can you imagine?
I mean, that's why I was like, I can't do this for 50 years. This is too much.
Yeah,
Figuring it out. And again, knowing who you are.
totally. So, what leadership lessons do you carry with you now from both your dissertation research and your hands-on work with the community?
I enjoy being adaptive and teaching others how to do that as well. And everything we've talked about flows into how communication, trust, relationship building, humility, all of that is part of it. So I enjoy challenging myself. There's times when I'm not perfect in any of those spaces, and then having to pull back and realize, am I the problem? Okay, let me learn that lesson. There's always something to learn. There's always something new to apply. So that's enjoyable for leadership, the new challenges every day, especially with a goal as lofty as health equity. It's not that it's unachievable. You can achieve it at the very small local level. And if we have enough people doing it at the local level, then globally we'll be fine. But being able to combat the challenges every day and learn where you might be playing a role and then fixing it, not just being okay with that, is the challenge I like. Every day is not the same.
So, it keeps you from being bored, at least, right?
For sure. That is very true.
To dig a little bit deeper, what do you think people misunderstand most about what it takes to lead meaningful community change?
People will limit it to money. And while that is a very big need, that's a resource that you cannot really replace. For communities who have been pushing through inequities for decades, if not centuries, they've typically come up with some solution that is more tribal or community based, meaning they'll exchange services or goods amongst each other, or they'll care for each other in a way that money doesn't necessarily replace. Sometimes that overflooding of that monetary resource without knowledge or understanding of how to bring in that cultural aspect kind of can ruin that. So just understanding how the community's been getting by and how goals can be addressed with that is really important. So I wouldn't just throw money at a situation and think you fixed it, which I think is what happens with a lot of government entities as well as large corporations. And then they're upset because they don't see the result that they want to see a year later. And that's because they did not communicate with the leaders or involve any of the practitioners in the actual field. They just thought $1 million check would fix it. That's the biggest issue. Money is necessary, but how you decide to involve the money, use it, bring people and empower them with it is really important. That's probably the biggest misunderstanding. And then relationship building, like being transformational versus being transactional. Do not build relationships just because you want to use that person in 5 or 10 years. It's very evident. And that's where the distrust comes, right? Build relationships because you genuinely have a connection. So all the relationships I'm building, I'm really talking to them. I really care about their mom. I really care about whether or not their child is having a good time in that particular subject in school. Those are real conversations and relationships we're building, not because I plan to use something or vice versa, but because we're going to be around each other for some years and we want this to be as fun and good as possible. But also, when we have hard conversations, we know we have these key connections beyond the problem. So sometimes when you're unable to have that true connection, that's when it becomes really easy to have plans fall apart.
It takes a special person to actually care and to really genuinely have true EQ,
Yes.
emotional intelligence, right?
That is a good point. Yes. Do not go into communities until you've determined if that's really your ministry.
For sure. As we get closer to the end, I
Mhm.
want to know the personal side of your journey. With a name like Treasure,
Yes.
please indulge us and tell us, how did you get a name that's so common yet unique?
Oh, yeah. My beautiful mom, she decided that she wanted to name me Treasure, which I'm very glad she did. She wanted me to make sure that I felt loved no matter where she was. So even when you say my name, I think of my mom and our relationship. It's a beautiful feeling, and I'm glad that she chose to name me Treasure.
If you could also indulge us, if someone is listening to this podcast and considering an EdD, what would you tell them about how to use the degree as a tool for change?
The EDD is necessary. You get to be a scholar practitioner. I would totally lean into that. Bring academia and rigor to the workplace, but also bring that practical side to the classroom because they don't typically interact often. And so sometimes the academic side doesn't understand what's happening on the field in real time. They won't know that until 10 years after the fact when someone writes a book, right? But if you're able to give them these real-time updates, then you might change the system in a quicker and more sustainable way, and vice versa.
Lastly, when you look back at your EdD journey, what rises to the top as the thing you're most proud of? Not just in your career, but in who you became along the way.
I'm really proud of finishing the degree. I was upset initially that it was taking me so long to finish. It took about 7 years because it happened during the pandemic. There was so much going on. But I'm actually really glad now after the fact that it took so long because my work ended up supporting a few organizations, but my main research site in responding to the Southern California wildfires. And they actually cited the work that we did as far as capacity building and preparation for emergency and disaster response as why they were so resilient in responding to that and helping the community get by. My community is still dealing with the aftermath of that fire, but this institution is one of the leaders in how they've responded. And so that felt much more impactful than me doing the MOU between them and two other entities and being done 4 years prior. I'd much rather have this long-lasting relationship where they really, really change the world and our little world. That's priceless.
That's such a powerful way to frame the journey because it reminds us that the degree changes the leader just as much as the leader changes the work. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Dr. Treasure, for sharing your story, for sharing your perspective, and for the depth behind the work that you do. Your journey is such a strong example of what can happen when research, leadership, and community commitment come together. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining again. If this conversation has made you think, laugh, or dream bigger, hit subscribe, leave a comment or a review, and share this episode with another current or aspiring EdD. Your support helps these stories reach more people who are ready to step into their own leadership journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep finding new ways to become EdD.